Paige, Morgan's been in an accident." Grant's voice trembled with fear as he clutched his phone. My heart sank as I turned away from the mirror, the shimmering wedding dress draping my body suddenly feeling like a cage. It was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, a celebration of love and commitment. But in that moment, everything changed. Grant's sister, Morgan, had been rushed to the hospital, and the news shattered the joyful anticipation that had filled my bohemian-styled apartment just moments earlier. As Grant hung up the call, his expression morphed from panic to a haunting determination. "I need to go to her," he said, his words laced with an urgency that sent a chill down my spine. I searched his eyes for reassurance, but all I found was a deep, unsettling void. "But the wedding?" I stammered, grasping at the threads of our once-perfect plan. Grant's jaw clenched as he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Paige. I have to be there for Morgan. We'll have to postpone everything." With those words, he turned and rushed out the door, leaving me standing amidst the delicate lace and satin, tears welling in my eyes. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to unravel the dream we had so carefully woven. As the hours ticked by, with no word from Grant, a gnawing suspicion began to take root. His behavior had been changing over the past few weeks, his attention constantly drawn to Morgan's well-being, even during our most intimate moments. Desperate for answers, I reached for my phone and dialed Kevin, my best friend and boss, at the vinyl record store where I worked. "Kev, something's not right," I confided, my voice trembling with uncertainty. Kevin's calming presence offered solace, but it couldn't quell the nagging feeling that Grant's sudden departure was more than just a family emergency. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a whirlwind of betrayal and deceit that would test the very limits of my resilience. The days after Grant's abrupt departure blurred together in a haze of confusion and heartache. I tried to lose myself in the rhythmic melodies of the vinyl records at work, but Kevin's concerned glances only magnified the doubts gnawing at my soul. "He's been acting strange lately," I confided in Kevin one afternoon, my fingers tracing the grooves of a well-worn album cover. "It's like he's a completely different person." Kevin's brow furrowed as he leaned against the counter. "Have you tried talking to him about it?" I shook my head, my lips pressed into a tight line. "Every time I bring it up, he brushes me off or changes the subject." As the weeks passed, Grant's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He would come home late, his eyes glazed over, and his phone constantly buzzing with messages he refused to share. The once loving fiancé I had adored was slowly slipping away, replaced by a stranger consumed by a dark obsession with his sister's well-being. One night, as Grant tossed and turned beside me, his phone lit up with a flurry of notifications. Against my better judgment, I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw made my blood run cold, a string of intimate messages between Grant and a woman named Alicia. Who's she talking about? Alicia's message read, "Your sister or your fiancé?" Grant's reply was swift and chilling. "Both. They're both wrapped around my finger." I recoiled in horror, my mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. Was Grant having an affair? Was Morgan involved in some twisted way? The certainty I had once felt about our relationship crumbled like a house of cards. In the days that followed, I became consumed by a burning desire to uncover the truth. I scoured Grant's emails and bank statements, piecing together a trail of financial discrepancies, lavish gifts, secret purchases, and unexplained wire transfers. "He's been playing us both," I confessed to Kevin, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and betrayal. "I need to stop him before he ruins everything." Kevin's eyes widened, but he nodded solemnly. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you." With Kevin's support, I began to collect evidence, screenshots, receipts, and damning messages, building a case against Grant's deceit. Each new discovery fueled the fire within me, transforming my pain into a burning determination for revenge. As the wedding date loomed closer, Grant's behavior became increasingly unhinged. He would disappear for hours, only to return with flimsy excuses and a haunted look in his eyes. It was as if he were a puppet, dancing to the tune of some unseen force. Finally, the night before our wedding, Grant announced he had to meet a business associate for an urgent matter. I knew in my gut that this was no ordinary meeting. Without hesitation, I followed him, tracking his movements through the city until he arrived at a secluded hotel. And there, in the dimly lit parking lot, I witnessed the ultimate betrayal. Grant embracing Alicia, whispering promises of a future together, away from the lies and deception that had consumed our lives. As I watched them from the shadows, a cold resolve washed over me. Grant had sealed his fate, and now it was my turn to make him pay. In the aftermath of witnessing Grant's ultimate betrayal, a fire ignited within me, fueling my determination to unravel the twisted web of deceit he had woven. No longer would I be the naive, trusting fiancé blinded by love. It was time to fight back. The next morning, as Grant emerged from the bedroom, his hair disheveled and his eyes heavy with guilt, I confronted him head-on. "So how was your business meeting last night?" I spat, my words laced with venom. Grant froze, his face drained of color. "Paige, I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off, my hands trembling with rage. "I saw you with Alicia. How long has this been going on?" For a moment, Grant remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then, with a resigned sigh, he lifted his eyes to meet mine. "Longer than you think." As the sordid details spilled from his lips, a sickening realization dawned upon me. Alicia had been manipulating both Grant and his sister, Morgan, for years. She had wormed her way into their lives, exploiting their vulnerabilities and driving a wedge between them, all for her own twisted gain. "She's been playing us all," Grant admitted, his voice thick with shame. I was too blind to see it. But as the truth unraveled, it became clear that Grant's hands were far from clean. He had been funneling money to Alicia, showering her with expensive gifts and indulging her every whim, all while lying to me about our financial situation. "How could you do this to me?" I cried, hot tears streaming down my cheeks. "After everything we've been through together?" Grant's shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with remorse. "I'm sorry, Paige. I never meant for it to go this far." But his apologies rang hollow, a feeble attempt to assuage the pain he had inflicted. In that moment, I realized that the man I had once loved was nothing more than a shadow, a puppet dancing to Alicia's twisted tune. As the days ticked by, the wedding preparations continued, a cruel charade that only served to fuel my simmering rage. Grant tried to make amends, offering empty promises and half-hearted gestures, but I had seen the truth in his actions, and there was no turning back. "You need to cancel everything," I told him one night, my voice steely with resolve. "This wedding is a lie, and I won't be a part of it." Grant's eyes widened, pleading with me to reconsider. "Paige, please, let's talk about this." But my mind was made up. "Do whatever you want, just cancel everything. It's over." As I uttered those words, a weight lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a burning determination to make Grant and Alicia pay for their betrayal. No longer would I be the victim. It was time to take control and enact my revenge. In the days leading up to the wedding, I meticulously gathered evidence, compiling a dossier of their misdeeds, financial records, incriminating messages, and even surveillance footage that captured their illicit encounters. With each new piece of damning proof, my resolve hardened, and a plan began to take shape. On the eve of what should have been our wedding day, I made a silent vow. Grant and Alicia would face the consequences of their actions, and I would be the one to deliver the ultimate payback. With Grant's confession and the revelations about Alicia's manipulative schemes, a fire ignited within me, a burning desire for justice that would not be extinguished until I exposed their betrayal and made them pay for their actions. I became a woman possessed, scouring every nook and cranny for evidence of their deceit. Bank statements, credit card bills, even Grant's hidden stash of burner phones. Nothing was off limits in my quest for the truth. And with each new discovery, the picture became clearer. Grant had been funneling money to Alicia for years, lavishing her with extravagant gifts and vacations, all while lying to me about our finances. The depth of his deception was staggering, and yet he had the audacity to beg for my forgiveness. "Paige, please, let me make it up to you," he pleaded one evening as I pored over a stack of incriminating receipts. "It was all Alicia's doing. She manipulated me." I scoffed, my fingers tightening around the damning evidence. "Save it, Grant. I'm done with your lies." His eyes widened, panic setting in as he realized the gravity of the situation. "What are you going to do?" A twisted smile crept across my lips. "Oh, you'll see." In the days that followed, I became a master of subterfuge, shadowing Grant's every move and documenting his clandestine meetings with Alicia. I captured them in their most intimate moments, their lips locked in passionate embraces, their bodies intertwined in a twisted dance of betrayal. And as the evidence mounted, a plan began to take shape, a grand scheme to expose their duplicity and bring their house of cards crashing down around them. "I have everything I need," I confided in Kevin one night, spreading the damning photographs and financial records across the counter of the vinyl store. "It's time to make my move." Kevin's eyes widened as he took in the sheer magnitude of Grant and Alicia's deception. "Paige, this is—" He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. "I know," I replied, my voice steely with resolve, "and they're going to pay for what they've done." As the days ticked down to what should have been our wedding, the tension mounted. Grant grew increasingly agitated, sensing that the noose was tightening around his neck. But still, he clung to the delusion that he could salvage our relationship, that his empty promises and hollow apologies would be enough to make me forget his transgressions. "Paige, I'm begging you," he pleaded one night, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Don't do anything rash. Think about what you're risking." But his words fell on deaf ears. I had already made up my mind. There would be no turning back, no second chances. Grant and Alicia had sealed their fate, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. On the eve of our scheduled wedding day, I made the final preparations, gathering the evidence and steeling myself for the confrontation to come. As I looked in the mirror, the reflection staring back at me was one of a woman transformed, a woman who had endured the ultimate betrayal and emerged stronger, more determined than ever before. And as the sun rose on what should have been the happiest day of my life, I knew that this was no longer about love or commitment. This was about revenge, pure and simple, and Grant and Alicia were about to learn the true cost of their deceit. The day before our supposed wedding, the air was thick with tension. Grant tried his best to act nonchalant, but I could see the guilt etched on his face every time he looked at me. As I busied myself with last-minute preparations, he approached me hesitantly. "Paige, I have to meet with a business associate tonight," he said, avoiding my gaze. I fought back a bitter laugh. "A business associate, or is it Alicia?" Grant's eyes widened, and he opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to silence him. "Save it, Grant. I'm done with your lies." I turned away, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. He reached out, his fingers grazing my arm. "Paige, please, it's not what you think." I jerked away from his touch, whirling around to face him. "Then what is it, Grant? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been betraying me for months, maybe even years." His shoulders slumped, and he let out a defeated sigh. "You're right. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I swear I never meant to hurt you." "Well, you did," I spat, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "And now it's time to face the consequences." As he opened his mouth to protest, I held up a hand, silencing him once more. "Just go, Grant. Go meet your precious Alicia. But know this, whatever happens next, it's on you." With that, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the apartment, leaving him standing there, a pathetic shell of the man I once loved. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, a newfound sense of determination washed over me. I knew what I had to do. I had to catch Grant and Alicia in the act, to expose their betrayal in the most public, humiliating way possible. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called Kevin. "Kev, I need your help," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Kevin's familiar voice cut through the silence. "Anything, Paige. What do you need?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I'm going to follow Grant tonight. I need you to be ready with the evidence, everything we've collected." Kevin didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. Just say the word, and I'll be there." As I ended the call, a sense of calm settled over me. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for, the chance to make Grant and Alicia pay for their deceit. I tailed Grant from a safe distance, my heart pounding in my chest as he made his way to a secluded hotel on the outskirts of town. Sure enough, there she was, Alicia, waiting for him in the dimly lit parking lot, her arms outstretched in an embrace that made my stomach churn. I watched, my fingers tightening around my phone, as they disappeared into the hotel, their laughter echoing through the night like a twisted mockery of the love we once shared. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. With a few taps on my screen, I sent a message to Kevin, the weight of my decision settling heavily on my shoulders. It's time. Bring everything you've got. We're going to stop this wedding once and for all. The grand wedding venue was a vision of elegance, with delicate flower arrangements adorning every surface and soft music filling the air. But as I stood there, surrounded by the trappings of what should have been the happiest day of my life, all I could feel was a burning rage. Grant fidgeted nervously beside me, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Paige, please," he whispered, his voice strained. "Let's just call this whole thing off. We can start over, I swear." I turned to him, my eyes blazing with fury. "Start over?" I scoffed. "After everything you've done? After all the lies and betrayal?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. In that moment, the sounds of the arriving guests faded into the background, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. As the ceremony began, I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing with 1,000 different emotions. Part of me wanted to run, to flee from this twisted charade and leave Grant and his web of deceit behind. But a stronger force kept me rooted to the spot, the burning desire for justice, for vengeance. And then, as the officiant began to speak, I saw him, Kevin, slipping through the crowd like a silent guardian angel, a flash drive clutched in his hand. Our eyes met, and he gave a subtle nod, a silent confirmation that the moment had arrived. Without warning, I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the hushed silence like a knife. "Stop!" I shouted, drawing all eyes towards me. "This wedding can't go on." Grant's face drained of color as he turned to face me, his eyes wide with panic. "Paige, what are you doing?" But I didn't falter, my gaze fixed on the crowd before me. "This man," I declared, gesturing towards Grant, "has been lying to all of us. He's been carrying on an affair, betraying me in the worst possible way." A collective gasp rippled through the guests, and I could see the shock and disbelief etched on their faces. But I wasn't done yet. "Not only that," I continued, my voice rising with each word, "but he's been funneling money, our money, to his mistress. He's been living a double life, playing us all for fools." Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. He was trapped, caught in the web of his own lies. "Don't believe me?" I turned to Kevin, who stepped forward, holding up the flash drive. "I have proof. Financial records, text messages, even surveillance footage of Grant and his mistress together." With a few clicks, the damning evidence began to play on the large screens flanking the altar, leaving no doubt as to the depth of Grant's betrayal. The room erupted into chaos, with guests shouting and hurling accusations at the man who was supposed to be my husband. But through it all, I stood tall, my chin raised defiantly, reveling in the sweet taste of revenge. Grant turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Paige, please, I can explain." But I cut him off with a cold, bitter laugh. "Explain? What's there to explain, Grant? You've been lying to me from the start. You never loved me. I was just a means to an end, another pawn in your twisted game." As the words left my lips, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I had been carrying for far too long. In that moment, I was free, free from the shackles of Grant's deceit, free to reclaim my life and my dignity. And as the guests began to disperse, murmuring their disbelief and disgust, I turned to Grant one last time, my eyes alight with a newfound strength. "It's over," I said, my voice unwavering. "You've lost everything, your money, your reputation, and any chance you ever had at happiness with me. This is the end, Grant. The end of your lies and the beginning of my new life." With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving Grant standing alone in the ruins of his own making, a broken man brought to his knees by the weight of his own betrayal. In the aftermath of the disastrous wedding, the world seemed to shift on its axis. As the dust settled and the initial shock wore off, a new reality began to take shape. One where Grant's web of lies lay in tatters, exposed for all to see. I retreated to the safety of my family home, seeking solace in the warm embrace of my parents. Their eyes shone with a mixture of pride and sorrow as they held me close, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," my father murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "That snake got what was coming to him." My mother nodded, her hand gently stroking my hair. "We're here for you, Paige. Always." Their unwavering support was a balm to my wounded soul, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and family could prevail. As the days passed, the fallout from the wedding disaster continued to ripple through our lives. Grant's parents, once so proud and aloof, were forced to confront the harsh reality of their son's betrayal. I'll never forget the look on his mother's face when she showed up at my doorstep, her usual composure cracked, and her eyes rimmed with tears. "Paige," she choked out, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. We had no idea." I stood there, uncertain of how to respond. This was the woman who had once looked down on me, who had deemed me unworthy of her precious son, and yet, in that moment, all I could see was a broken mother, her world shattered by the actions of the child she had trusted. "He's lost everything," she continued, her words tumbling out in a torrent of grief. His job, his money, his future, all because of that wretched woman he was seeing. I nodded, my own anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Alicia." I spat out the name like a curse. She was the one pulling the strings all along. Mrs. Grant's eyes widened, and she clutched at my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You know about her? Tell me everything, Paige. I need to know the truth." And so I did. I laid it all out, the financial records, the incriminating text messages, the sordid details of Grant and Alicia's twisted affair. With each new revelation, Mrs. Grant's face grew paler, her carefully cultivated poise crumbling into dust. By the time I finished, she was a shell of her former self, her eyes hollow and her shoulders slumped in defeat. "My son," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What have I done to deserve this?" In that moment, I felt a pang of pity for this once formidable woman. She had been betrayed, not just by her son, but by the very foundations of the life she had built. But pity quickly gave way to resolve as I turned my attention to the next phase of my plan. With Grant's life in ruins and his family reeling from the fallout, it was time to deal with the true architect of this tragedy, Alicia. I tracked her down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. Her once polished veneer cracked and faded. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Well, well," she sneered, her lips curling into a twisted smirk. "If it isn't the jilted bride herself." I didn't flinch, my gaze steady and unwavering. "It's over, Alicia. Your little game is up." She scoffed, tossing her head back in a mockery of nonchalance. "Game? I don't know what you're talking about." But I wasn't buying her act. Not anymore. With a flick of my wrist, I produced the damning evidence, a trail of financial records and incriminating photos that left no room for doubt. Alicia's bravado faltered as she flipped through the pages, her eyes growing wider with each passing moment. "How?" she stammered, her voice catching in her throat. "It doesn't matter how," I cut her off, my voice cold and unyielding. "What matters is that you're finished. You've lost your hold over Grant, and now you're nothing but a pathetic, broken shell of a woman." For a moment she stared at me, her eyes burning with a mixture of rage and fear. Then, without warning, she crumpled to the floor, her body racked with sobs. "You don't understand," she wailed, her words punctuated by ragged gasps. "I had to do it. He was my only chance at a better life." I felt a twinge of pity, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a wave of disgust. This woman had torn my life apart, all in pursuit of her own selfish desires. "Save it," I spat, turning my back on her pitiful form. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." As I walked away, I could hear her cries echoing down the dingy hallway, a haunting reminder of the depths to which some people will sink in pursuit of their twisted ambitions. But I didn't look back. Not this time. My path lay ahead, a road paved with the ashes of Grant and Alicia's deceit, and I was determined to forge a new life from the rubble of their betrayal. In the weeks that followed my confrontation with Alicia, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted. A burden I had been carrying for far too long finally cast aside. As I wandered the familiar streets of my hometown, I found myself drawn to the places that had once brought me solace. The cozy vinyl store where I had spent countless hours losing myself in the rhythmic grooves of old records. The quaint coffee shop where Kevin and I would swap stories and dreams. It was in these places that I began to find myself again, to rediscover the parts of me that had been buried beneath the debris of Grant and Alicia's betrayal. Kevin was there, as he had always been, a steadfast presence in my life. We would sit for hours, sipping our drinks and discussing the events that had turned our world upside down. "I still can't believe it," he would say, shaking his head in disbelief. "How could he do that to you?" I would simply shrug, the anger that had once consumed me replaced by a weary acceptance. "It doesn't matter now," I would reply. "He's the one who has to live with the consequences of his actions." And indeed, the consequences for Grant were swift and severe. His once promising career lay in tatters, his financial empire crumbling under the weight of his deception. Even his own family had turned their backs on him, unable to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster he had become. As for Alicia, she had simply vanished. Her grand schemes and manipulations reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale of greed and hubris. In the midst of it all, I found solace in the familiar rhythm of my life, the comforting melodies of the vinyl store, the warmth of my parents' embrace, the unwavering support of friends like Kevin. It was in these moments that I realized the true strength of the bonds that had been forged through this ordeal. While Grant and Alicia had sought to tear me down, to strip me of my dignity and self-worth, they had ultimately failed. For, in their wake, I had discovered a resilience within myself that I never knew existed. A determination to rise above the ashes of their betrayal and forge a new path, one that was true to my own desires and ambitions. And so, with a newfound sense of purpose, I set about rebuilding my life. I poured my heart and soul into the vinyl store, curating a collection that celebrated the raw emotions and unvarnished truth that had been so lacking in my relationship with Grant. Slowly but surely, the store became a sanctuary, a gathering place for kindred spirits who sought refuge in the timeless melodies of bygone eras. And through it all, Kevin was by my side, a constant source of support and encouragement. "You're doing amazing things, Paige," he would say, his eyes shining with pride. "This place, it's a reflection of who you really are." And he was right. In the process of rebuilding, I had rediscovered the parts of myself that had been lost: the dreamer, the artist, the seeker of truth and beauty. As the months passed, I found myself letting go of the anger and bitterness that had once consumed me. In their place, a newfound sense of peace took root, a quiet understanding that the path ahead was mine to forge, free from the shackles of Grant and Alicia's deceit. And in those quiet moments, as the warm crackle of vinyl filled the air and the familiar melodies washed over me, I would smile to myself, secure in the knowledge that I had emerged from the ashes of betrayal, stronger and more resilient than ever before. For in the end, it was not Grant or Alicia who had triumphed, but the indomitable human spirit, the ability to rise above the darkness and forge a new path, one step at a time, towards the light of a brighter tomorrow. I gave you everything, Zeke. My love, my trust, my father's legacy, and this is how you repay me? I gripped the damning photos in my shaking hands, the glossy images of my husband's infidelity blurring through my tears. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When Zeke and I first met, it was a whirlwind romance. He was charming, ambitious, and innovative, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. My father, the founder of our successful real estate development company, took an immediate liking to him. Zeke joined the company and quickly gained favor, his star rising as a brilliant architect. But as his reputation grew, so did his ego. Late nights, schmoozing clients at fancy dinners and exclusive clubs became the norm. When I expressed my concerns, Zeke dismissed them, claiming I didn't understand the demands of his job. I wanted to believe him, to trust that his heart remained true to me and our daughter, Violet. I was blind. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. The photos in my hands told a different story. There was Zeke, his lips locked with a young interns at a company event. Natalie, her name was, pretty, ambitious, and clearly enamored with my husband. "Mom?" Violet's voice shook me from my thoughts. "What's wrong?" I hastily wiped my tears, but it was too late. She'd seen the photos scattered across my desk. "It's your father," I managed, my voice breaking. "He's been having an affair." Violet's face contorted with anger. "What? With who?" "An intern. Natalie." "That bastard!" Violet slammed her fist on the desk. "You have to confront him, Mom. This can't go on." I shook my head, fear gripping my heart. "I can't. The scandal, the company. Your grandfather's health is declining. The stress could kill him." "And what about the stress this is causing you?" Violet demanded. He doesn't deserve your protection, Mom, not anymore. Deep down, I knew she was right, but the thought of my carefully constructed world crumbling around me was paralyzing. The sound of the front door opening snapped me back to reality. Zeke was home, no doubt fresh from another late night at the office. I quickly gathered the photos, shoving them into a drawer. Violet glared as Zeke entered the room, his suit impeccable, but the scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to him like a guilty verdict. "What's with the long faces?" he asked, his charm now seeming so false, so hollow. Before I could respond, Violet stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "How could you, Dad? How could you cheat on Mom, on our family, with some intern?" Zeke's eyes widened, darting to me in panic. "Stella, I can explain," but I held up a hand, silencing him. The pain in my heart had crystallized into something harder, sharper. Determination. "No more lies, Zeke," I said coldly. "No more excuses. You've made your choice. Now you'll face the consequences." I didn't know what those consequences would be yet, but one thing was certain. I would not let this man destroy everything my father had built, everything I had worked so hard to protect, even if it meant destroying him first. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, my mind still reeling from the revelation of Zeke's betrayal. As I walked through the halls, I overheard a conversation that stopped me in my tracks. "I'm telling you, man, Zeke's got it made," a male colleague said. "That new intern, Natalie, she's practically eating out of his hand. He said she's the reason he landed the Johnsons' project." Laughter echoed from the room. "I bet she is. I heard they have a special bond, if you know what I mean." Rage boiled inside me. Not only was Zeke cheating, but he was using his affair to advance his career. I fought the urge to storm in and confront him, knowing I needed to play this smart. My phone buzzed with a text from Violet. "Skipped school. Following Dad. Caught him bringing Natalie to the lake house. Taking pictures now." My heart sank. The lake house was our family's sanctuary, a place filled with cherished memories. How dare he taint it with his sordid affair? I quickly replied, telling Violet to be careful and come home immediately. Then I made a decision. If Zeke wanted to play dirty, I'd dig up every speck of dirt on his precious Natalie. A few phone calls later, I had my answer. Natalie had a history of seducing married men at her previous jobs, using her charm to extract money, gifts, and favors. She was nothing but a gold-digging homewrecker. As I sat fuming in my office, my secretary knocked on the door, her face ashen. "Mrs. Delaney, I'm so sorry. It's your father. He's had a heart attack." The world tilted beneath my feet. "What? Is he—" "He's alive, but in critical condition. Your mother is with him at the hospital." I rushed to the hospital, my thoughts a tangled mess of grief, anger, and fear. When I arrived, my mother was in tears, clutching my father's hand as he lay unconscious, hooked up to beeping machines. Zeke burst in moments later, his face a mask of concern. "Stella, I came as soon as I heard. How is he?" I couldn't even look at him, my disgust threatening to overwhelm me. "Like you care. You're probably just worried about your precious promotion." "How can you say that?" Zeke had the audacity to sound wounded. "Your father is like a second dad to me. I love him." "Spare me the act, Zeke. I know about Natalie. I know everything." Before he could respond, the doctor entered, his expression grim. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Delaney has passed away. We did everything we could." The room spun. I collapsed into a chair, my mother's wails echoing in my ears. Zeke tried to embrace me, but I shoved him away, repulsed by his touch. The funeral was a blur. Zeke played the role of the grieving son-in-law to perfection, shaking hands and accepting condolences, but I caught him whispering to Natalie, their heads bent together conspiratorially. After the service, the family lawyer gathered us for the reading of the will. To everyone's shock, my father had named me the sole heir and CEO of the company. Zeke's face contorted with rage, his mask slipping. Violet squeezed my hand, her voice low. "I told Grandpa about Zeke's cheating before he died. He wanted to make sure we were protected." Zeke cornered me after the lawyer left, his eyes blazing. "This is absurd, Stella. You know I'm the one who should be running the company. You're not cut out for this." I stood my ground, drawing strength from my daughter's love and my father's trust. "The only thing absurd here is your behavior, Zeke. You've lied, cheated, and betrayed this family. You're not fit to lead a dog on a leash, let alone this company." "You're making a huge mistake, Stella," Zeke snarled. "If you don't give me control, I'll ruin you I'll destroy everything you hold dear. I looked him straight in the eye, my resolve unwavering. Bring it on, Zeke. You have no idea what I'm capable of. You want a war? You've got one. The first order of business was to remove Zeke from the company. I had him escorted from the building, his access revoked, and his email account terminated. The look of shock and fury on his face as security led him out was a small victory, but I knew it was only the beginning. Next, I called an emergency board meeting. Armed with the evidence of Zeke's affair and unethical business practices, I laid bare his betrayal. The board was stunned, but unanimously voted to support my decision to fire him. I thought I'd feel a sense of triumph, but all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. The man I had loved, the father of my child, was nothing but a snake in the grass. Zeke wasted no time retaliating. He started calling our clients, spinning tales of my incompetence and instability. He even went to the media, painting me as a scorned, vengeful wife who couldn't handle the pressure of running a company. But his most vicious move came in the form of a lawsuit. Natalie, the intern he'd been sleeping with, filed a sexual harassment claim against the company. She alleged that I had created a toxic work environment out of jealousy and spite. I was served the papers in the middle of a client meeting. As I read the lurid accusations, my stomach churned with rage and disgust. This is all lies, I said through gritted teeth. Zeke is behind this. He's using her to get back at me. My lawyer, a fierce woman named Olivia, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. We'll fight this, Stella. Zeke and Natalie won't get away with it. But the damage was done. The lawsuit hit the news, and suddenly, our company was synonymous with scandal. Clients started pulling their projects, investors backed out, and our stock prices plummeted. I was drowning, barely keeping my head above water as I fought to save my father's legacy. Violet, my rock through it all, refused to let me give up. We'll find a way to beat them, Mom, she said, her eyes blazing with determination. We just need to fight fire with fire. Late one night, as I pored over legal documents and financial reports, Violet burst into my home office. Mom, look what I found. She thrust her phone into my hands, a series of texts displayed on the screen. I read them quickly, my heart pounding. They were messages between Zeke and Natalie detailing their plan to take over the company and force me out. I hacked into Dad's old phone, Violet explained. He never changed his password. There's more, Mom. Natalie's pregnant. She's claiming it's Dad's baby, but I think it's all part of their scheme. I felt sick to my stomach. Zeke's cruelty knew no bounds. He was willing to use an innocent child as a pawn in his twisted game. We need to expose them, I said, my voice shaking with anger. We need to show the world what kind of monsters they really are. Violet nodded, a fierce smile on her face. I have an idea. The annual company gala is coming up. What if we confront them there, in front of everyone? We can present the evidence, expose their lies, and watch them crash and burn. It was a risky plan, but I was out of options. Zeke and Natalie had backed me into a corner, and I was ready to come out swinging. Let's do it, I said, my resolve hardening. Let's take those bastards down. As I hugged my daughter close, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Zeke had underestimated me, underestimated the strength of a mother's love and the power of the truth. He wanted a war. He was about to get one hell of a battle. The night of the gala arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Violet and I had spent weeks gathering evidence, piecing together the sordid details of Zeke and Natalie's scheme. We had bank statements, recorded conversations, and a damning trail of emails that painted a clear picture of their deceit. I smoothed my hands over my dress, a sleek black number that made me feel powerful, armored. Violet squeezed my hand as we entered the ballroom, the glittering chandeliers and elegant decor, a stark contrast to the ugliness we were about to expose. Zeke was holding court in the center of the room, Natalie draped on his arm like a trophy. They were all smiles and charm, working the crowd with their lies and manipulation. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. With Violet by my side, I approached the stage, the evidence clutched tightly in my hands. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? My voice rang out over the din of conversation, and the room fell silent. Zeke's eyes narrowed as he saw me, his jaw clenching with anger. Natalie's smile faltered, a flicker of fear crossing her face. I have something important to share with all of you tonight, I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. The truth about Zeke Delaney and Natalie Summers. I held up the stack of documents, my hands shaking slightly. These are records of their affair, their conspiracy to defraud this company and steal my family's legacy. They've been lying to all of us, manipulating and scheming for their own gain. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Zeke's face turned an ugly shade of red, his fists clenched at his sides. "This is ridiculous, Stella," he spat. "You're just a bitter, jealous woman who can't handle the fact that I've moved on. Those documents are forgeries, lies." Natalie nodded, her eyes wide with false innocence. "She's crazy. I'm just an intern. I would never do something like this." But I wasn't finished. "There's more," I said, my voice steady. "Natalie is pregnant. She's been claiming the baby is Zeke's, using it as leverage to force me out of the company." Zeke blanched, his mouth falling open in shock. Natalie's hand flew to her stomach, her eyes darting around the room in panic. "That's not true!" Zeke shouted, his voice cracking. "The baby is mine. Stella is just trying to turn everyone against me." I shook my head, a mirthless smile on my face. "Oh, really? Then how do you explain these text messages detailing your plans to use the pregnancy to extort money from multiple men?" I held up my phone, the damning texts displayed on the screen. The crowd gasped, their faces a mix of shock and disgust. "And as for the paternity of the baby," Violet chimed in, "we have DNA test results proving that Zeke is not the father. Natalie has been playing all of you, just like she played my dad." The room exploded into chaos. Zeke lunged for me, his face contorted with rage, but security held him back. Natalie collapsed to the floor, sobbing and wailing about how she'd been set up. The police arrived moments later, handcuffs at the ready. As they led Zeke and Natalie away, reading them their rights, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. The truth had prevailed, and my father's legacy was safe. I turned to Violet, tears streaming down my face. "We did it, baby. We won." She hugged me tightly, her own tears mingling with mine. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You're the strongest person I know." As the guests began to disperse, whispering and gossiping about the night's events, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more wounds to heal, but for now, I savored the victory, the knowledge that I had faced my demons and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Zeke had tried to break me, to shatter everything I held dear. But he had underestimated the power of a woman's resilience, the unbreakable bond of a mother and daughter united against all odds. And that was a mistake he would regret for the rest of his miserable life. The fallout from the gala was immediate and intense. The news of Zeke and Natalie's arrests spread like wildfire, plastered across every newspaper and gossip site in the city. The company was inundated with calls from reporters, investors, and clients demanding answers. I spent hours in meetings with the board, lawyers, and PR teams, trying to control the narrative and minimize the damage. It was exhausting, but I refused to let Zeke's actions destroy everything we had built. Violet was my rock through it all, keeping me focused and grounded. She even took on some of the media responsibilities, giving interviews and statements with a poise and maturity far beyond her years. "You're amazing. You know that?" I told her one evening, as we sat in my office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. "I couldn't do this without you." She grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, someone has to keep you in line, Mom. Can't have you going all scorned woman on us again." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "I think I'll leave the dramatics to the soap operas from now on." But our moment of levity was short-lived. The next day, I received a call from the prison where Zeke was being held. "Mrs. Delaney, this is Warden Johnson. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your husband was found dead in his cell this morning. It appears to be a suicide." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. For all his flaws and betrayals, Zeke had once been the love of my life, the father of my child. The thought of him taking his own life, alone and desperate, was almost too much to bear. Violet found me in my room, staring blankly at the wall. "Mom, what's wrong?" I told her the news, my voice hollow and distant. She sat beside me, her arms wrapped around my shoulders as I wept. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I know you loved him, despite everything." I nodded, my tears soaking her shirt. "I did. God help me, I did. But I also hated him for what he did to us, to the company. I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to know," Violet said softly. "You're allowed to grieve, to be angry, to feel however you need to feel. But don't let his choices define you, Mom. You're so much stronger than that." Her words were like a beacon in the darkness, guiding me back to shore. I hugged her tightly, marveling at the incredible young woman she had become. The funeral was a small, somber affair. I stood beside Violet, holding her hand as we watched the casket being lowered into the ground. Natalie was there, her belly swollen with her lies, her face a mask of crocodile tears. I felt a flicker of pity for her, mixed with a simmering rage. She had been a pawn in Zeke's game, but she had also made her own choices, her own mistakes. She would have to live with the consequences, just as I would. As the mourners dispersed, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the crowd. It was Olivia, my lawyer, her expression grim. "Stella, I need to talk to you," she said, pulling me aside. "It's about Zeke's death. The police found a note in his cell addressed to you." My heart seized in my chest. "What did it say?" Olivia hesitated, her eyes filled with concern. "He claimed that you drove him to it, that you ruined his life and left him no choice. He's trying to make you responsible, even in death." I felt a white-hot anger surge through me, mingled with a sickening dread. Even from beyond the grave, Zeke was still trying to manipulate me, to twist the truth to suit his own ends. "He's not going to win, Olivia," I said, my voice low and fierce. "I won't let him destroy me, not anymore. I'm going to fight back, with everything I have." Olivia nodded, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. "I know you will, Stella, and I'll be right there beside you, every step of the way." As I walked away from the cemetery, Violet's hand clasped tightly in mine. I knew that the battle was far from over. Zeke's final act of cruelty had opened up a new front in the war, one that threatened to consume me from the inside out. But I also knew that I had the strength, the courage, and the love to prevail. I had my daughter, my company, and the truth on my side. And that was a force that even death itself could not defeat. 1 year later, I stood at the podium addressing a room full of journalists and industry leaders. The company had not only survived the scandal, but thrived under my leadership. We had expanded into new markets, taken on innovative projects, and cemented our reputation as a force to be reckoned with. But the road to recovery had been long and painful. In the wake of Zeke's death and the revelation of his final cruel message, I had been besieged by media attacks and legal challenges. Natalie, desperate to save herself, had tried to paint me as a ruthless, vindictive woman who had driven her poor, innocent lover to suicide. It was a narrative that some were all too eager to believe. I faced accusations, investigations, and even death threats from those who bought into Zeke and Natalie's lies. But I refused to back down. With Violet and Olivia by my side, I fought back against every false claim, every attempt to smear my name and my company. We dug deeper into Zeke and Natalie's past, uncovering a trail of deception and manipulation that stretched back years. We found other women Zeke had targeted, other companies he had tried to infiltrate and destroy. We exposed Natalie's history of extortion and fraud, revealing the true depths of her cruelty and greed. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The media started to question Natalie's credibility, to see through the cracks in her story. The legal challenges against me were dismissed, one by one, as the evidence of my innocence mounted. And then, the final blow. Natalie's web of lies unraveled completely when it was revealed that the child she had claimed was Zeke's had actually been fathered by another married man she had been scheming against. She was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and extortion. As I watched her being led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. She had thought she could destroy me, could use my pain and grief as a weapon against me. But she had underestimated the strength of a woman who had already lost everything and survived. Violet, now a successful artist in her own right, had channeled her own pain and anger into her work. Her pieces, raw and powerful, had garnered critical acclaim and sparked important conversations about toxic masculinity and the resilience of women. "I'm so proud of you, Violet," I told her, as we celebrated her latest exhibition. "You've taken the darkest moments of our lives and turned them into something beautiful, something meaningful." She hugged me tightly, her eyes shining with tears. "I learned from the best, Mom. You showed me what it means to be strong, to fight for what's right, no matter the cost. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace and purpose that had eluded me for so long. We've both come so far, haven't we? Sometimes I can hardly believe it. Believe it, Mom, Violet said, her voice filled with conviction. We're survivors, you and me. We're unbreakable. As I looked out over the city skyline, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, I knew she was right. Zeke and Natalie had tried to break me, to shatter my world into a million pieces. But I had taken those pieces and rebuilt myself, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I had my daughter, my company, and the knowledge that I had faced the worst that life could throw at me and emerged victorious. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had claimed her power and her truth. And I knew, with a certainty that burned bright in my soul, that nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again. As I stepped down from the podium to a standing ovation, I caught Violet's eye in the crowd. She grinned at me, her fist raised in a gesture of solidarity and triumph. Here's to the future, Mom, she mouthed, her eyes sparkling with pride and love. I raised my own fist in return, feeling a rush of gratitude and joy that brought tears to my eyes. Here's to the future, indeed, a future that we had fought for, that we had earned, that we had claimed as our own. A future that belonged to us and us alone. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Zeke and Natalie sat at the defendant's table, their faces pale and drawn. They had been denied bail, deemed a flight risk after the extent of their crimes had been revealed. I sat in the front row, Violet and Olivia beside me. We had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering evidence and testimony, yet building an airtight case against the two people who had nearly destroyed our lives. As the judge entered the room, I felt a shiver run down my spine. This was it, the moment of truth, the final reckoning. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Valerie, laid out the case against Zeke and Natalie with ruthless efficiency. She detailed their schemes, their lies, their callous disregard for the lives they had ruined. She called witness after witness, each one painting a damning picture of greed, manipulation, and betrayal. Former employees, clients, even some of Natalie's other victims, they all took the stand, their voices shaking with anger and pain. And then it was my turn. As I walked to the witness box, I felt a rush of nerves and adrenaline, but I also felt a sense of clarity, a deep conviction in the truth of my words. I told my story from the beginning, the love, the trust, the dreams that Zeke and I had shared, the slow, insidious unraveling of our marriage as his ego and ambition consumed him, the devastating discovery of his affair, his betrayal, his cruelty. I spoke of the battle to save my company, my father's legacy, from their clutches, the lies, the smears, the legal challenges that had nearly broken me. But I also spoke of the strength I had found in my daughter, in my friends, in the power of the truth. As I finished my testimony, I looked directly at Zeke and Natalie, my eyes blazing with a fierce, righteous anger. "You thought you could destroy me," I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "You thought you could take everything I had, everything I loved, and crush it beneath your feet. But you were wrong." Zeke's face twisted with rage, his fists clenched at his sides. Natalie's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a way out. "I am not the weak, broken woman you thought I was," I continued, my voice rising with each word. "I am a survivor, a fighter, a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her child, and I will not rest until justice is served, until you pay for every last one of your crimes." The courtroom erupted in applause, the sound washing over me like a wave. I looked over at Violet, tears streaming down her face, her eyes shining with pride and love. The judge called for order, his gavel banging against the bench. And then, the moment we had all been waiting for. In the case of the state versus Ezekiel Delaney and Natalie Summers, on the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, the jury finds the defendants guilty on all counts. The words hit me like a thunderbolt, a shock of joy and relief that brought me to my knees. Violet and Olivia were there in an instant, their arms around me, their tears mingling with my own. I watched as Zeke and Natalie were led away in handcuffs, their faces contorted with shock and disbelief. They had thought themselves invincible, untouchable, above the law and the consequences of their actions. But they had been wrong. They had underestimated the power of justice, the strength of a woman's will, the unbreakable bond of a mother and daughter united against all odds. As I walked out of the courtroom, my head held high, my heart filled with a fierce, unshakable joy, I knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, more wounds to heal. But I also knew that I had the strength, the courage, and the love to face them all. I had my daughter, my company, and the knowledge that I had faced the worst that life could throw at me and emerged victorious. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had claimed her power and her truth, and nothing, not even the darkest of demons, could ever take that away from me again. 5 years later, I stood on the balcony of my new office, overlooking the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the buildings and streets below. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a chance to take stock of how far I had come. The company had thrived under my leadership, growing and expanding in ways I had never dreamed possible. We had taken on new challenges, new projects, new frontiers, and emerged stronger and more successful than ever before. But it wasn't just the business that had flourished. Violet had blossomed into an incredible young woman, her artistic talent and passion taking her to new heights. She had just opened her first solo exhibition, a stunning collection of pieces that explored themes of resilience, healing, and the power of the human spirit. As I looked out over the city, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that had eluded me for so long. The wounds of the past had healed, the scars faded into a distant memory. I had found a new sense of purpose, a new lease on life, a new reason to wake up every morning with a smile on my face. And yet I knew that I could never forget the lessons I had learned, the battles I had fought, the strength I had found within myself. Those experiences had shaped me, molded me into the woman I was today. A woman who knew her own worth, her own power, her own unbreakable spirit. A knock on the door startled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Olivia, a smile on her face, a file in her hand. "Sorry to interrupt, Stella, but I thought you should see this," she said, handing me the file. I opened it, my eyes scanning the pages, my heart skipping a beat. It was a report from the parole board detailing Zeke and Natalie's latest hearing. "They were denied," Olivia said softly. "The board cited their lack of remorse as their continued attempts to manipulate and deceive. They'll be staying behind bars for a long time to come." I felt a rush of emotions, relief, sadness, a twinge of pity for the broken, twisted souls they had become. But I also felt a sense of closure, a final chapter in the story of our shared past. "Thank you, Olivia," I said, my voice steady and strong, "for everything you've done, for standing by me through it all. I couldn't have made it without you." She smiled, her eyes shining with warmth and affection. "You give yourself too little credit, Stella. You're the strongest, most resilient person I know. You've overcome more than most people could even imagine." I hugged her, feeling a rush of gratitude and love for this woman who had been my rock, my anchor, my unwavering supporter through the darkest of times. As she left the office, I turned back to the balcony, my eyes drawn to a small framed photo on the wall. It was a picture of my father, his face beaming with pride and joy, his arm around a much younger version of myself. I felt a pang of grief, a moment of longing for the man who had been my guiding light, my North Star, my constant source of love and support. But I also felt a sense of deep, abiding gratitude for the legacy he had left me, the values he had instilled in me, the strength he had helped me find within myself. "I miss you, Dad," I whispered, my fingers tracing the outline of his face. "But I know you're always with me, always watching over me. And I promise I'll make you proud. I'll honor your memory every single day." As I stepped back from the photo, I felt a sense of renewed purpose, a fire burning bright in my heart. I had been through hell and back, had faced the worst that life could throw at me, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had claimed her power and her truth, and I knew, with a certainty that blazed like the sun, that nothing could ever hold me back, ever again. I smiled, my eyes fixed on the horizon, my heart filled with hope and possibility. The future was mine, and I was ready to face it, head on, with all the strength and courage of a true warrior.